Hey everyone, Gill Gross here. Obviously, live to discuss what is news that I can't even big would be obviously a complete understatement, a total circus, a saga that I didn't really think could get any more dramatic or ridiculous or crazy, and it has. So I've never done this before. I don't have that much of a plan, but I just want to talk through this and make sure that we can try to sort this out, get the right information out there for what has obviously been a very consequential morning in the tennis world. I have been on Australia time, basically covering the tennis, and I woke up this morning at like 1 p.m. Pacific time, which is like 8:30 in the morning in Australia, and all of this was already going on. I guess I want to try to somewhat explain from square one what the last 2 days have been in my eyes, what the sequence of events have been, and I'm going to keep an eye on the live chat. I do want this to be a back and forth thing here, so questions, comments, send them my way. But let's just talk through this real quick. So Novak obviously announced on Instagram that he was headed to Australia and that he had received a medical exemption. Tennis Australia confirmed that and then explained basically their process of how a medical exemption can be granted. And it's very important, and I don't think that this has been communicated very well, and I think a lot of people don't know this, but one of the reasons you can get a medical exemption is if you have an acute medical condition that makes it inadvisable to take the vaccine. That is one thing, and I think that is what most people think of this medical exemption as. There is a second category of this medical exemption, which is so much different in the sense that it's really easy and common to imagine that many players would require this, which is that if you have been COVID positive in the last 6 months, you get a medical exemption. Tennis Australia and the Australian government, by the way, has guaranteed that, first of all, us, Australian Open, Tennis Australia, we have nothing to do with this. This is the government. And that is absolutely 100% true. This is a visa thing. This is an immigration thing. This has nothing to do with the Australian Open. This is the government deciding if some guy is allowed to get a visa and come in, right? And what the government has explained and has tried to convey is that there is a blind process with two medical advisory boards that are supposed to make these decisions, and that ideally they don't have the information of the case that they're looking at. In other words, you have a team of doctors looking at documents, deciding if an exemption is to be granted, and they have no idea that they're looking at Novak Djokovic's papers. Well, a lot of people just, and I don't want to really get into this further, but a lot of people have just simply not bought into this. They don't believe it. I personally buy it, but that's the kind of thing where there's not going to be an intelligent discussion to be had here. It's either you're going to call BS because you just don't believe what's being said, or you just believe what's being said. And honestly, there are not enough facts around that situation to have an intelligent conversation. It's just about your disposition to trust in what the officials are saying. You can either distrust and kind of have your conspiratorial or pessimistic outlook, or you can have your optimistic and trusting outlook, and you're either in one of those camps. Anyway, what's happened since is that Novak has landed in Australia, and the federal government has, and a lot of this is still at this moment beyond my understanding. The federal government has stepped in. Suddenly they seem to have some jurisdiction, and they have denied the visa, despite the fact that there are other players in Australia on the exemption. So let me just cut to the chase here. Here's the main thing that needs to be explained. what is different in Novak Djokovic's case? And remember, this whole thing, all of the outrage that was originally generated on this was predicated around the fact that Novak Djokovic was, and this was debatable, was receiving special treatment because he is Novak Djokovic, one of the world's all-time greatest tennis players. So special treatment. Well, now the coin has been flipped. Now the government needs to explain, how is Novak Djokovic not getting targeted adverse treatment because his visa's been denied? What about all the other players who received this medical exemption? This medical exemption that includes the fact or the possibility that someone just tested positive for COVID in the last 6 months. Now, they had plenty of time before that to get vaccinated, obviously, if they wanted to. But if you've tested positive for COVID in the last 6 months, which, by the way, it seems like everyone has, exaggerating, but you know what I mean, then you receive this medical exemption. A handful of players have received this medical exemption and are in Australia. What has happened here? What is different with Novak? One of the things I've read is that Djokovic applied, or his team, I shouldn't really say Novak, I don't think he handles this kind of thing, but that his team applied for the wrong visa. And that it's a lower level of visa that does not qualify for medical exemption. So is that it? Because I have a lot of trouble. Maybe that's it, right? I have a lot of trouble believing that the reason Novak Djokovic is ultimately going to be denied entry is because of an administrative error. Now, I have a lot of respect for the visa process and how difficult that is for everyone. Like, getting interviewed at the border is not something that's totally crazy or out of the norm. Visas are complicated, and this thing gets kind of tough. But you would think that if that's the issue, that's what they're going to run with. I have trouble seeing that. I have trouble seeing the Premier Andrews and the powers that be saying the reason Novak is ultimately not going to be in Australia is because his team applied for the wrong visa. I just don't really see that happening. Let's see. But that is the only thing that I've read that would explain why Novak would be any different from the other players who received the medical exemptions. I'm going to read this super chat from Tibor. Thank you, Tibor. Gill, if doctors gave him an exemption, then the government is doing now what? They know better about medical conditions than doctors now. This, in my view, is outrageous. Yeah, it needs to be explained because obviously the medical part of this was cleared. Whatever part that was, it was cleared. Now, I think it's about waiting for answers here. But again, the prime question that needs to be answered is, how is Novak different from the other players who have received exemptions? I'm going to read this comment from Freeman Griffin. Sorry, go wrong. If the fans have to be vaccinated to get in the door and the people who work there, then the players do too. I had to show my vaccination card when I went to the Laver Cup. But that's the thing. That's not, I mean, that's your opinion on what the rules should be in Australia. But at the end of the day, that's not what the tournament has obviously constructed in terms of, again, this has nothing to do with the Australian Open is the thing at the moment. I think that's the important thing to understand. The Australian Open could have made their own rules. They could have said no one is allowed on the grounds, even players who are unvaccinated. They didn't do that. They are welcoming all players who are able to get a work visa into Australia, right? Again, I completely respect that opinion. If the opinion is that if there's a vaccination requirement at the tournament for those who work there and the fans, then the players should be held to that as well. I completely respect that opinion. That's just not the issue at the moment with Novak, because the Australian Open has nothing to do with whether or not Novak can play. If Novak can get a visa and he can show up in Melbourne, the tournament is going to give him a spot in the draw, and that's that. But this is about Novak obtaining a work visa and entering. This is an immigration issue. It has nothing to do with the Australian Open's decision to allow players to exercise their visa regardless of vaccination status, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I'm reading this comment from Patrick. Unless Joker tells us what his condition is exactly, I'm not buying any of this. He's a rabid anti-vaxxer also. I will say this. Let's cover the politics part of this, the political part of this issue, which is that the backlash in Australia has been immense, which is that people are angry at the notion that Novak, who has been skeptical of vaccination, all vaccination, and really a lot of modern Western medicine. You know, he has said that he was really ashamed to get his elbow surgery, that it really bothered him, that he tries to avoid medicine. He was skeptical of the COVID vaccine before the COVID vaccine existed, right? Just when it was a concept. The idea that all Melbourne Australians and people in Melbourne would get vaccinated and Novak would be let in despite not being vaccinated, just because he's Novak Djokovic, right? That notion, which again, I think that there are some issues with that. I think that a lot of that is not really based in the full scope of what the facts are. But obviously that has upset people. And by the way, a lot of people are just upset with Novak for not being vaxxed. And all of this aside, just upset at Novak for not being vaxxed. But the net, however you want to look at it, the political reaction has been a tremendous, not the political reaction, the public's reaction has been a tremendous amount of backlash. As a result, you would think that there would be political gain to be had by the Australian powers that be, especially the federal government, especially the premier. He seems to really embrace the role of looking tough here, in a way, tough against allowing Novak in. So that backlash was immense. Now, to go back to Novak Djokovic's PR, I think undoubtedly it was a mistake that Novak did not go full transparency here and to try to mitigate the backlash. I think he should have said the reason why he received the exemption. And if that reason was, I tested positive in the last 6 months, again, this is not a matter of, oh, you couldn't have been vaccinated before then. But if that was the reason, it would simply clear up all of the conspiracies and all of the pessimism being thrown around about this being some sort of backdoor deal, some sort of for the money, under the table, corrupt process. If Novak had just said, look, I tested positive, this is when I tested positive, it wouldn't be very difficult at all for people to just accept that, and the backlash would have been lessened. Maybe that would have helped Novak. If this is indeed something that is political, in the sense where the federal government of Australia and Premier Andrews is trying to be very tough to try to respond to the backlash that Novak Djokovic's medical exemption has received, if that makes sense. I did talk to on my other show, a Tennis Show, I did have a good conversation with Amy Lundy, my regular co-host, but also Amy's brother, who's a doctor and has been treating COVID patients throughout the pandemic, talking about the likelihood or the rarity that there are real allergic reactions to vaccinations. And it is a pretty rare thing. And if you take a set of about 300 athletes, there's going to be, and then someone was also feeding me some more information on this. There's going to be zero, maybe one player who is able to prove that they have a legitimate allergic reaction to the ingredients in one of the two types of COVID-19 vaccines. So in all likelihood, this is to say that the vast majority, if not the entirety of players who are able to receive this medical exemption from the Australian government, those players likely tested positive in the last 6 months, and that is why they received that medical exemption. It is highly unlikely that there are a handful of players. It is just statistically unlikely that you have allergic reactions at play here. So just to cover that needs to be that needs to be said, that's going to be the reason why these medical exemptions are handed out. By the way, the communication was bad because Craig Tiley months ago had said that it needs to be an acute medical condition. So they've reversed their communication there, unfortunately. So Scott Morrison apparently just tweeted that the rules are the rules, period. It's very confusing because at one point in this process, it seemed like the Victorian government had jurisdiction, that the state of Victoria was going to determine whether or not Novak could enter. And I'm still confused. Obviously, I'm not well versed in Australian politics, being an American. I'm still confused at how this has now turned into a federal government issue. And it's worth saying that throughout this entire saga, it has been Scott Morrison on the federal side of things that has been publicly far tougher on the prospects of unvaccinated players entering. Again, this is all besides the point. What Scott Morrison needs to say is how come there are other players who are allowed entry under this same medical exemption, but Novak Djokovic wasn't. That's the question that needs to be answered here. This isn't about, and we could litigate all kinds of differing opinions on how vaccine mandates should go. We're not going to do that, but I'm just saying opinions all over the map on how tournaments, how countries should handle their immigration. That's obviously a separate thing. What needs to be answered right now is there are a handful of players, most of them because they had tested positive in the last 6 months, have received this medical exemption. What is it about Novak Djokovic's case where this went wrong? Because I don't think they're going to say, well, it was the wrong visa. I think Scott Morrison is not going to go with that. And already, if that's the tweet, that the rules are the rules, he's not really facing that an administrative error might have been the reason here. Nathan Roman says, hey, Gill, I can't help but think his social media post incurred this event state of affairs. Yeah, it would have been, again, the PR move is transparency. Because if you don't, and look, I understand privacy. I understand the desire for medical privacy. But the PR move, if you wanted to avoid the backlash in the best possible way, you go to transparency. In my opinion, that was a PR mistake. All right, I'm going to keep reading through these comments. Massive political pressure to reject his visa. That is true. Oh, by the way, there is an appeals process going on. Thank you again, Freeman, for the question. Novak is appealing this decision in court. My understanding is that he is still in Melbourne, that he is kind of going to litigate this, and I don't know what kind of case he has. I wouldn't know that, but it's unlikely that he's going to stay in Melbourne. Obviously, that process is gonna take some time. He will probably be on a flight back, is what I've heard from my sources. Not my sources; they're not mine. From the sources that I have been following throughout this situation, which are journalists with real sources, not me. Yeah, Angelica's covers makes an interesting point here that I'd like to address. She says apparently the independent panel that gave him the exemption didn't check that the evidence was ACC legitimate. I think the border control has looked at the documents and they don't think they are legitimate. It is true that, and again, it's not abnormal to have an interviewing process when you are entering a country to get a visa. That is not abnormal. It is true that they have asked to review the documentation. So that could be another, when we get answers, and again, right now we don't have them, the answers to that question, why was Novak different? Why is Novak different from the other players who have received a medical exemption? The answer might be that they said, hey, let me check the documents, and that there was some sort of issue with the documents being insufficient in some sort of way. A possibility of what might come out. Who are the other players that got this exemption? So far, I don't think any have actually come out and said that. Again, that's part of this, right? If Novak had not said anything, he should just said, I'm going to Australia. Theoretically, we wouldn't know if he were vaccinated or not. I think the only realistic read on this is that, again, Novak Djokovic is proud to not be vaccinated. And that's why he would say that he received an exemption, because he's happy that he's not vaccinated because he doesn't believe in it. And again, this is not, I don't think with Novak, I don't think there's a specific disdain for vaccination more than there is a specific distrust or disbelief in medicine as a whole. That is, just following his comments throughout the years on the things he believes in, it seems like it's all natural. He believes in natural medicine, not synthetic medicine. So in that respect, I do believe that he is proud to not be vaccinated. And that is why he made the decision to say, I'm going on medical exemption. I think he should have just taken it further. If I were advising him, I would say, Novak, say that you got COVID, or say that you have this acute medical condition, and that is why you received the medical exemption. Because it obviously it fueled the flames of speculation, conspiracies, and all that to not be transparent. I talked about this way back in the beginning when Novak's vaccination status was up in the air, that the more you don't say, the more you open the door for speculation. Again, politically, questions need to be answered. So obviously, it's now understandably a very popular opinion that because of all the local backlash, social media, and in the media, that is what ultimately forced Australia's hand to deny the visa. I really hope that's not the case. I mean, it would be regardless of what you think of the original kind of arrangement that the Australian Open made, but I really don't understand much room for sympathizing with this decision by the Australian government to deny the visa if it were based on the public response. The public response, again, I was surprised by it, and I do understand. I do get it. I really do. And if you're in Melbourne and you're upset and that you don't think that anyone should be able to come in who's unvaccinated, I do get that. But in terms of what the Australian government, Tennis Australia, provided to us, which is this was the medical process. It was these two independent boards. They were blinded, and they came to that decision. Plus, one of the categories was 6 months, 6 months window to have a COVID case. With all that being said, I'm not sure what more people really wanted, other than for them to take some sort of hard, fast stance where if you're not vaccinated, you are not allowed to come in, no exceptions. But obviously, when you're going to create immigration policy, you're unlikely to do that. You're much more likely to say, well, we're going to set up a panel. We're going to set up a board that is going to review cases that determine whether or not an exemption is something that would be suitable. Are people going to boycott the Australian Open? That's a question from Mark Lebel. If Novak doesn't play, I'm sure there's a lot of Novak Djokovic fans that won't watch. I do think that there are some misconceptions. And by the way, I'm going to have to go in 5 minutes to record 3. I do think that there are some misconceptions about how tournaments make money and the economic kind of structures of tournaments. Everything is very macro. These television deals, for example, they are generally long-term deals. They're generally 5, 10, 15-year deals. And when those deals expire, they look at data across the course of the last deal. So when people say like ratings are going to tank, and if Novak's not at the Australian Open, ratings are going to tank and the Australian Open is going to lose tons of money. That's not how this works. I'm sorry. If that's the outlook, you don't understand how the TV industry works. It might, in a macro sense, slightly reduce the data points when the entire large sample size of the 5 to 10 years to even 15 is up. But there is no money that is lost really in the short term. Sponsorships, they've all been sold already. Before this happened, you're going to see Kia on the court. You're going to see 1578 or whatever that liquor company is. I know I botched it. You're going to see all these sponsors all over the court. Money's already exchanged hands. That's over. That's done. So the Australian Open is not going to collapse because one player isn't there. And this is on both sides have been discussing this. Sides that have been dubious of the decision. The side that has said, oh, there's no way that they're not just giving Novak an exemption because he's Novak. They have said, oh, it's the money. It's the money. And now in this case, I think any Novak, Djokovic supporter who thinks the tournament's going to collapse because he's not there, it's not true. It's not how these tournaments are set up financially. All right. I'm going to continue, but I only have a couple more. The question is, Gill, have there been any exceptions? Exceptions to what? I'm not sure. What does this have to do with immigration? Because Novak Djokovic is not an immigrant. He is a professional tennis player. To enter a country, you need a visa to work. So every tennis player gets a visa. That's how it works. So this is immigration. The Australian Open and Tennis Australia, if Novak has a visa and is in Melbourne, they don't care. Novak will play. This is about the government giving someone who's entering the country a visa to work. So this is an immigration issue. What acute medical condition can Djokovic have? He has literally won 20 Grand Slams. It's likely he does not have an acute medical condition and he just tested positive for COVID in the last 6 months. Gill, why don't you believe the problem is just in an error in visa application? I have a lot of trouble with, look, maybe that's going to happen, but I don't think that that's what they're going to go with. Novak doesn't play the Australian Open because someone made an administrative error. That seems like the kind of thing that if you really want to fix, you can fix. Now, again, it goes back to there shouldn't be any special treatment, but even if a regular citizen who is not famous and is not rich, if a regular citizen shows up to the border and there is a administrative error with their visa, I would hope they could get it sorted out. Regardless, Novak Djokovic or anyone, I would hope that they would get it sorted out. Jason asks, will the players boycott? This slam could have been held anywhere. I don't think they'll boycott. In fact, I don't know that the players are I don't know that they're that sympathetic, right? Because 90% are vaccinated. So there's going to be a lot of players who probably take the outlook, look, I was vaccinated, I mean, look, this situation stinks, and I'm sure there will be a lot of players who are extremely sympathetic for Novak, who support him fully and will speak out against everything that's gone on. But there's going to be a lot of players who are also like, dude, get vaccinated. No doubt about that. All right. I'm going to end it here. A lot of questions still to be answered about basically, again, the root question. I want to leave you with this. There are a lot of players who have received a medical exemption. It's not just Novak. Those players have been let into the country. Why hasn't, what was different about Novak Djokovic's case and what happened at the border here that complicated things? That is the main question we await an answer. And that is going to kind of determine, I think, what the view is on this situation. But obviously, I'll continue to cover this story. Make sure you're subscribed. Please do consider joining my membership program for $2 a month. This will go up on podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Hope you enjoyed, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.